Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 96, and we're going to cover 1 Samuel chapter 16 through 18. Last time we left off, we saw Saul's kingship stripped from him because he did not fully obey God and kill the Amalekites, but he left King Agag alive and some of the choice livestock. And with this first disobedience, when he sacrificed the sacrifice too early before Samuel got there, we saw that his dynasty was stripped away from him, meaning none of his children would be king. But with this sin, his kingship was stripped away from him, meaning you're no longer king. And all we're waiting on is the countdown to the days before the new king is anointed. But right now, you're no longer on the throne in God's eyes, which is why we walk into the anointing of the new king in chapter 16. And it says in chapter 16, verse 1, "Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I have rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go, and I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself amongst his sons." So verse 4 says, so Samuel did what the Lord said and came to Bethlehem. And we get a very critical statement of what we've been building the entire time. In verse 7, look at what it says here. "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." And that's our key statement. That's what we've been driving home the entire time. And God has finally stated the intentions of his heart. He doesn't look at what man looks at. He doesn't judge with the outer appearance. He looks at the heart. Because remember what we've been getting at the entire time. When God built the people of Israel, what was their constitution? It was faith. You are to have the faith of Abraham. So nothing has changed with God. He's consistent. Even though we've developed into this great nation, even though we've moved from the patriarchs to the leaders, to the judges, now to the kings, God has not changed with his people. They may be more developed, they may be more complex, but he still desires a people of faith. He desires a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That's always been their purpose. And as Jesse is calling his sons out, God is saying no to each one of these. He says, the Lord has not chosen this one. The Lord has not chosen this one either. And in verse 11, and Samuel said to Jesse, are these all the children? And he said, there remains yet the youngest, and behold, he is tending the sheep. Remember that. Remember our theme? God developing a theology of shepherds. We've seen Jacob as a shepherd. We've seen Moses as a shepherd. Now we're seeing David as a shepherd. That theology is being built on shepherds, because when we get to the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is our shepherd, the true ultimate shepherd. And we'll start to see that fleshed out more as we continue to walk through this theology. Then Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. And Samuel arose and went to Ramah. Listen to this. This is what we talked about last time. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and the evil spirit from the Lord terrorized him. Now hold your horses. We're going to cover how could an evil spirit come from the Lord very soon. But I want you to take note of how the Spirit is coming and departing. And we need to cover this evil spirit here. And we'll do it very soon. And so this evil spirit would terrorize Saul, but God had already providentially ordained for this evil spirit to stop tormenting Saul when the harp is played by David. So it's recommended to Saul that there's a skillful musician, a mighty man of valor, a warrior, one who is prudent in speech, and a handsome man, and the Lord is with him. They're referring to David. This is in verse 18. And so David came to Saul and attended him, and Saul loved him greatly. He became his armor bearer. And our chapter 16 ends like this. So it came about whenever the evil spirit from God came to Saul, David would take the harp and play it with his hand, and Saul would be refreshed and be well, and the evil spirit would depart from him. Now we move into the famous chapter of the battle with Goliath in chapter 17. And this is an interesting chapter. And a lot of people, when they preach this chapter, they preach it as if this chapter is about how to slay your giants. And that's not the main point of this passage. The main point of this passage is, now that we're getting rid of the false king, God is revealing and confirming to the people who the true king is. Now, I'm not saying we can't ever make that application that God will help you with your giants, but that's not the main point of this passage. That could be used as a sub point. And so what we want to do today is we want to get the main point of this passage before we start to use sub points like that for application. So the Philistines gather their armies for battle, and a champion comes out from the army of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, which 1 cubit is about 18 inches. So when you're talking 6 cubit, this puts Goliath around 9 feet tall. This is a ridiculous height. So take Shaquille O'Neal, if you have him as a point of reference, and add 2 feet to him. This is how tall the guy is we're talking about. So it'd be similar to a Nephilim that we talked about in the past. And so they challenge the Israelites. They say, choose a man from yourself and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants. But if we prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants. It says, when Saul and all of Israel heard the words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. So what's the problem here? Israel is looking for somebody to fight this battle, but who should have fought it? Who's the tallest guy in Israel? Head and shoulders above everybody else. It's Saul. Saul should be the first one up to fight this battle, but he's scared. He already hid behind the luggage. He already hid behind the baggage. He already was plowing the field when his people had a vow that their eye would be gouged out. The Spirit of the Lord had to fill him for him to help. Now it's time for him to step up for battle, and he's afraid. They're looking for somebody else. And we've found our guy. We've ID'd our leader because somebody is not scared, and his name is David. And so his 3 brothers are going to battle, but Jesse sends David to take his brother some cheese and some crackers. This is in verse 17. It says, take an ephah of roasted grain, these 10 loaves, and run to the camp of your brothers. Bring them also 10 cuts of cheese to the commander of their 1,000. So David is just sent to take bread and cheese, but look at what happens. But when David gets there in verse 20, he arose early in the morning and left the flock with the keeper and took the supplies and went as Jesse had commanded. And he came to the circle of the camp while the army was going out in battle array, shouting a war cry. Israel and the Philistines drew up in battle. Then David left his baggage in the care of the baggage keeper and ran to the battle line and entered the order to greet his brothers. So David is there asking questions. One question he asks is, what will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Who is this circumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God? You already see David's boldness coming out, and his brothers are discouraging him and pushing him back. But it says in verse 31, when the words which David spoke were heard, they were told to Saul, and he sent for him. David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. Then Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. You are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David says to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. So Saul buys in. The guy who should have been battling himself buys in, and he gives him his armor. And David took it off and says, I can't wear this, for it hadn't been tested. And he moves forward with a stick in his hand and chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand. So when he comes to the Philistine, obviously the Philistine sees this and he mocks David. He says, am I a dog that you have come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine also said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. And then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And he does just that. He reaches in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead, and the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face on the ground. Thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in David's hand. Then David ran over to the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath and killed him and cut his head off. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Look at what David does with the head. Now I want you to pick up 2 significant things from this chapter. One, it's been pointed out that it's something deeper on why David does what he does. Do you know why he uses stones to kill Goliath? In the law, it says that you stone a blasphemer. And David has heard Goliath blaspheming the God of Israel, and he wants to stone him and kill him. He's being obedient to the law. He's a man after God's own heart. So we emphasize the sling and the rocks, but we never emphasize how close David is obeying the law. He's going to kill this blasphemer, and he does it. The second thing I want you to notice is look at what he does with the head when he chops it off Goliath. Verse 54. Then David took the Philistine's head and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his weapons in his tent. Why did he ship the head to Jerusalem? This is good theology. Melchizedek was from Salem, from Jerusalem. We're starting to establish a theology that kings are from Jerusalem and kings go to Jerusalem. And David theology is good. God is showing David what kings do, and his face is pointed towards Jerusalem. And we see Jesus tie into this. When his face is pointed toward Jerusalem, why is he going to Jerusalem? It's more than just to die. He's going to Jerusalem because he's a king, and he's coming to conquer death as a king would. You have to deepen your theology on why Jesus is coming down to Jerusalem. He's finishing the conquest that Joshua failed. And he's continuing in the spirit of David under the Davidic covenant. And you see all of these things fleshed out when they come to life more in the New Testament, when you've seen them in the Old. And we even see Jonathan, who is the real hero of the story. As we move into chapter 18, he knows who the true king is. Look at what he does for David. It says, now it came about when he had finished speaking to Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his armor, including his sword and his bow and his belt. Jonathan is giving David his clothes because he's communicating to him, you are the true king, not me. And we're about to take a dark turn because Saul is about to turn on David. They start to sing and dance and celebrate with song. And this is the song they come up with. They say that Saul has slain thousands, but David has slain 10,000s. And this causes Saul to become very angry. Verse 9 says, he looked at David with suspicion from that day on. He even tries to kill David by tossing spears at him, but David escapes them twice. And this causes Saul to be afraid because the Lord was with him but had departed from Saul. And the Lord continues to prosper David, and he's with him, even to the point where the rest of the chapter, Saul is trying to set David up. He gives his daughter to David. Initially, David rejects the first daughter, but he agrees to the second daughter on the basis of the dowry of killing 100 Philistines. Saul asked in verse 25 for 100 Philistine foreskins. And so basically all Saul was trying to do was to expose David to danger, to get him to die on the battlefield. But David comes back with 200 Philistine foreskins. So Saul has to give Michal, his daughter, to David. And this is how our chapter rides out. David is blessed over and over again, and Saul becomes more and more afraid. But think about it. What did God say when he didn't kill King Agag? He said through Samuel, "You are no longer king." And this is not caught up to Saul yet. And he's having to learn this over and over again. But eventually his time will truly expire, and we're about to see that. So what do we learn from this? Our practical application today is that we're starting to winnow down the seed. We know who the true king is now. Now our true king is going to flow from this line, and we can start to track this line better. And so I would much rather you walk away from this passage learning who the true king is and who flows from the true king, and deepen your faith in him and worship him, than you to learn how to slay your giants. But if you want to use this passage on slaying your giants, please make it a sub point and not the main point. Just hermeneutics 101 before we ride out. You guys have a good day.